There was once a prince who wished to marry, but not merely to marry well. He wanted a real princess, a true princess, though what such truth might look like, no one seemed able to say with certainty. So he traveled from one kingdom to another, entering courts bright with chandeliers and polished manners, only to return unsatisfied. Every palace offered beauty. Every noble house offered refinement. Yet something always felt uncertain, as if silk and courtesy might be disguising what could not easily be measured. At last he came home weary, still alone, and no wiser about how truth might ever present itself. Then, one wild night, when rain lashed the windows and thunder rolled over the roofs, a knocking sounded at the palace gate. When the doors were opened, there stood a young woman soaked through by the storm. Water ran from her hair, her dress clung to her, and her shoes were ruined. Yet despite her miserable appearance, she announced with calm dignity that she was a princess. The old king blinked. The prince stared. The queen, however, said very little. She only looked at the stranger with a thoughtful expression, as if some quiet idea had already begun to form in her mind. Now the queen was not easily persuaded by titles spoken at the door, however noble the voice or graceful the posture. If the girl truly was a princess, then perhaps some sign of it would reveal itself. And so, without fuss, without announcement, and with the calm determination that often belongs to older women who have seen much of the world, the queen prepared a test. She ordered one bed in the finest guest chamber to be stripped bare. Then, from a small box, she took out a single pea and placed it upon the bottom board, where no ordinary sleeper would ever notice it at all. Over the pea, the queen placed a mattress, then another, and another still, until 20 mattresses stood in a neat and impossible tower. Upon them she laid 20 feather beds, so that the whole arrangement rose like a cloud built by servants. The chamber looked more like a theatrical invention than a place where anyone might sensibly sleep. Yet the queen seemed satisfied. If the young woman was merely delicate, the bed would be luxuriously comfortable. But if she possessed that mysterious and absurd refinement expected of true royalty, perhaps the smallest discomfort would travel upward through all that softness and find her in the night. The stranger was shown to the guest chamber, where candles trembled in silver holders, and the high bed waited like a strange monument of comfort. She was tired from the storm, too polite to complain, and far too well-bred to ask why such an extraordinary heap of bedding had been prepared for her. So she climbed, carefully and rather awkwardly, into the nest of linen and feathers, while the rain tapped insistently at the window panes. Beneath all that softness, at the very base, lay the pea, small and silent, holding within it the fate of the evening's question. The night passed, but not gently. Though the room was warm and the bed impossibly soft to all appearance, the young woman could not sleep. She turned, sighed, shifted again, and woke each time with the feeling that something hard and dreadful lay beneath her. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet the discomfort persisted with an almost insulting determination. While the palace slept in peace, the storm-brought guest endured a long night of broken rest, bruised patience, and bewildered dignity, as though the bed itself were engaged in some polite but merciless conspiracy against her. In the morning, the queen received the young woman with courtesy and asked, in the mildest tone possible, whether she had slept well. The question seemed innocent enough, but the princess, pale from exhaustion and still too honest to hide her distress, confessed that she had hardly slept at all. Something in the bed, she said, had pressed against her all night so horribly that she was black and blue from it. The prince nearly forgot his breakfast. The king looked amused and astonished. The queen alone remained composed, though inwardly she was already satisfied beyond doubt. For who, after all, but a true princess could possess such extraordinary sensitivity that a pea hidden beneath 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds would disturb her sleep? It was ridiculous, and yet in that ridiculousness, the test had worked perfectly. The queen revealed the pea, and the whole court marveled at the tiny green thing that had accomplished what lineage, jewels, and royal claims could not. The prince, who had spent so long searching for certainty in formal courts and glittering halls, suddenly found it in a rain-soaked stranger and a very small vegetable. The prince no longer doubted. If she could feel the pea, then she must indeed be the true princess he had been seeking, or so the story would forever insist. Yet beneath the fairy tale logic lies a more playful truth. Perhaps what moved him most was not merely the proof itself, but the strange grace with which she had arrived, endured discomfort, and answered honestly the next morning. In any case, relief entered the prince's heart like sunlight after rain. His searching was over. The world, absurd as it often is, had finally decided to reward him with certainty. Once the matter was settled, the palace came swiftly alive with wedding preparations. Tailors measured silk, servants aired ceremonial rooms, florists filled the halls with blossoms, musicians were called. The storm of the previous night seemed already transformed into the beginning of a fortunate legend. Yet the story kept its delicate sense of humor. All this grandeur, all this royal certainty had hinged on the sleepless complaint of one tired young woman and the stubborn presence of a pea. Such are the proportions of fairy tales, where the smallest object may decide the largest future with complete confidence. The court, which had no doubt spent many years performing elegance with great seriousness, now delighted in repeating the tale. They spoke of the guests' refinement. They spoke of the queen's cleverness. They spoke of the prince's happiness. Some likely believed every word exactly as it was told. Others perhaps smiled privately at the extravagance of the whole affair. But no one could deny that the story pleased them. There is a special joy in a test so foolish that only a fairy tale could treat it as wisdom. And that joy fluttered through the palace like bright ribbon in a spring wind. The wedding day arrived clear and bright. Bells rang across the palace court. The prince stood proud and relieved, while the princess, now welcomed without question, moved through the halls with all the dignity expected of her. Light fell upon polished floors, silk sleeves, and smiling faces. Whatever doubts had entered with the storm were gone. In their place stood ceremony, music, and the gentle certainty that fairy tales require. Even the queen, who had arranged the trial with such practical composure, seemed content to let the day belong to happiness rather than logic. And what became of the pea? According to the tale, it was placed in a museum, where it could be seen if no one had stolen it. This final detail is pure Andersen, dry, playful, and just slightly amused by the grandness people assign to trivial things. The pea, which had once been hidden at the bottom of a bed, now became a relic of royal truth. It is hard not to smile at the thought, yet perhaps every kingdom keeps some small object upon which an entire story of certainty has been built. That is why The Princess and the Pea remain so charming. It is not a dark fairy tale, nor a tragic one. It is a light satire dressed in lace and candlelight. It gently mocks the idea that nobility can be measured by impossible delicacy, while at the same time surrendering to the pleasure of the idea completely. We laugh, but we also want the story to be true. We want strange tests, improbable proofs, and happy endings. And so, Andersen gives us all three, wrapped neatly in elegance and mischief. At last, the princess, who could not sleep upon one hidden pea, had every comfort the palace could offer, and no doubt a bed prepared with considerably more honesty. The storm had passed. The strange trial was over. The prince had his answer, the queen had her proof, and the kingdom had a story delicious enough to repeat for generations. Sometimes, fairy tales ask us to survive sorrow. Sometimes they ask us to confront fear. And sometimes, with a lightness rare in Andersen, they ask us simply to enjoy the absurd elegance of a world where sensitivity itself becomes a kind of royal miracle. So ends the tale of the princess, the prince, the queen, and the pea. It is brief, polished, and delightfully unreasonable, yet beneath its humor lies a familiar wish that truth, however hidden, may one day reveal itself clearly. Here, that revelation does not come through battle or sorrow, but through a restless night and an impossible bed. It is a gentler kind of fairy tale, one that smiles rather than mourns. And in that smile, Andersen reminds us that wonder does not always arrive wrapped in darkness. Sometimes it arrives in silk, rain, and the smallest discomfort imaginable.